This isn't rare. It happens in America every single day. I never thought it would be me. Yet here I was, 72 years old, standing under the buzz of fluorescent lights in a courtroom that smelled like disinfectant and cold paper. In front of me lay a petition, my own son's handwriting, asking the court to take away my rights, claiming I was incompetent. Worse, stapled to it was a consent form, with my forged signature, shaky lines mimicking the same hand I once used, to sign his tuition checks. He leaned close, pressed my hand and whispered, "Dad, I just want to protect you from scams. You don't realize how vulnerable you are." The judge glanced down and ruled for a temporary restriction. I was barred from making any major financial decisions until a full hearing in 2 weeks. I stayed silent. My fingers clutched the folder on my lap. He thought I was powerless, but inside that folder was something he never saw coming. What would you do if your child dragged you to court? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of my story. I'm 72 years old, and though my back aches when the rain comes, I still feel steady enough to steer my own life. People see the number and think fragile, confused, ready to be tucked away. But that's not me. I spent decades on the factory floor, my hands wrapped around steel and hammers, my ears ringing from the clang of machines. The smell of grease and burnt metal got into my skin. It's still there sometimes in the cracks of my fingernails. I pushed overtime not because I loved it, but because I had to. Each extra shift meant the mortgage got paid faster. Jason's tuition stayed on track. Groceries were on the table. I worked until my bones hurt because I wanted a home that was ours, free and clear, a place no bank could threaten to take. Now I live here alone. My wife's been gone for years. Cancer took her slow like a thief with all the time in the world. I still talk to her sometimes when the house gets too quiet. I keep the Super Bowl ticket from the year we went together tucked in my wallet. It was the last big thing we did, both of us bundled in jackets, laughing at the cold. In my Bible, there's a letter she wrote before she passed. Her handwriting was steady, telling me to keep living, to stay sharp, to protect myself. I read it when the silence feels too heavy. My days follow a rhythm. I get up, make mint tea, and watch the steam curl in the morning sun. I like how the light cuts through the curtains, dust motes floating like they've got nowhere better to be. I check my bills, most are on AutoPay, neat and predictable. I drive to the grocery store myself, still steady behind the wheel. The cashier knows me by name. Sometimes she tries to help count my change, but I wave her off with a grin. I'm not fumbling, not yet. Sundays are for barbecue. I sit out back, ribs sizzling, the smell of smoke curling into the air. I crack open a Bud Light. The little hiss always makes me smile, and turn the radio to the Yankees game. The announcer's voice rises and falls, the crack of the bat traveling through the speakers, and I feel part of something bigger than this quiet house. My wife used to sit beside me, shaking her head when I shouted at a bad call. Now it's just me, the grill, and the ghosts of her laughter. I take care of the yard too. The roses she planted are still out front, red and stubborn. I patch the fence when it leans, sweep the garage when the dust gathers. There's pride in doing it myself. Every nail I hammer, every weed I pull is proof I'm still here, still able. Jason doesn't see it that way. My son has always been different, restless, chasing fast money. He ran through credit cards, dove headfirst into crypto, started a company that collapsed in months. I bailed him out more times than I want to admit. These days he wears his failures like invisible scars. But to everyone else, he's the picture of devotion. He shows up at my door with bottles of vitamins, sets them on the counter like I don't know how to keep myself alive. He fiddles with the locks, shaking his head, saying, "Dad, you can't keep forgetting this. One day you'll leave yourself wide open." His tone is gentle, but the words cut deep, planting doubt where I know there shouldn't be any. And in front of the neighbors, he shines. At barbecues, with the smoke rising and beer bottles clinking, Jason raises his voice. "I just want Dad safe. Seniors get targeted by scams every day. I'm just trying to do right by him." Heads nod, someone pats his back. Jason's such a good son. I stand there, silent, ribs cooling on my plate. I bite my tongue and let them believe it, because arguing would only make me look defensive. He knows how to play the crowd, how to wrap himself in virtue until no one questions what he's really after. Evan lives next door. He's a Gen Z kid, always in that garage with his sputtering car headphones glued to his head. The bass rattles through the walls, his video game chatter spilling out into the street. I mutter about him being a screw-up, a boy who'll never find his footing. Lazy, I tell myself, wasting his time on screens. Sometimes I glare when he revs that car too late at night, but he just shrugs and goes back to his world. Funny, isn't it? I thought he was the problem. Jason, though, he circles me like a vulture. Sweet words, careful touches, but always coming back to the same thing. Dad, why hang on to the house? You could sell it, move into a nice facility. They'll take care of you. No bills, no risks. His smile is warm, but his eyes flicker when he mentions money. I look around this house, these walls soaked in years of my labor, the floors where Jason once crawled as a toddler, the garden my wife planted. And I know what I have to say. This house is the blood and sweat of your parents. I told him, my voice sharper than I meant. No one touches it. The words hung between us heavy. He smiled anyway, that tight smile that never reached his eyes. It was then I realized he wasn't just talking about safety. He was circling my freedom, measuring it, waiting for the right time to cut it away. And everyone else, they only saw the vitamins on my counter, the kind words at a barbecue, the image of a son looking out for his aging father. They didn't see the truth. Not yet. Backstory. Full version, 500 words. First-person narration. When I think back over my life, the first sound that comes to me isn't laughter or music. It's steel. The ring of a hammer on metal. The screech of machines grinding, the hiss of steam escaping valves. The factory was its own kind of symphony, and for decades I lived inside that music. I was young when I started, and I stayed long after my body told me to quit. I put in every overtime shift offered. Winters were the hardest. I'd walk to the plant in the dark snow, crunching under my boots, my breath freezing into crystals that clung to my scarf. My hands cracked open in the cold, split skin that burned when the warm air hit. By the time my shift ended, the sun had gone, and the world outside the factory felt as tired as I was. The smell of machine oil got into my skin no matter how hard I scrubbed. I remember my wife shaking her head at the laundry, muttering that no soap on earth could fight the factory. My knuckles were swollen, nails rimmed with black, but I didn't complain. Because every time I thought about quitting early, I thought about Jason. He was my only son, and I swore he wouldn't have to break his back the way I did. Every check I brought home, I carved into pieces: mortgage, utilities, groceries, and always a little set aside for his future. When Jason got accepted to college, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand, pride swelling so strong it brought tears. I wrote the first tuition check that night. It emptied most of what I'd saved that month, but I didn't care. For the next 4 years, I packed cheap sandwiches for myself, patched the same winter coat, and drank the cheapest coffee the factory vending machine could spit out. Jason was going to have the chance I never had. I'll never forget the day I handed him the keys to his first car. It wasn't new. It wasn't shiny. A rust-red sedan, reliable enough to get him to class, to job interviews, to wherever life would take him. His eyes lit up like I'd given him the world. He hugged me hard and said, "Thanks, Dad. You're my hero." I carried that sentence like a medal. Through every ache in my back, every overtime night, I held on to it. Then came the startup. He had big dreams, apps, technology, things I barely understood. I watched his eyes sparkle with the same hope I once felt when I first held him as a baby. But dreams cost money, and when the whole thing collapsed, he was left drowning in debt. I remember the night he came to me. His hands shook as he laid bills across my kitchen table, papers scattered like fallen leaves. His voice cracked when he admitted failure. And I did what fathers do. I reached for my retirement fund. I signed a check that tore a hole in my savings, slid it across to him and said, "You'll get back on your feet." Everyone stumbles. He cried then, a grown man sobbing like a boy again. He hugged me, whispered, "You're still my hero." Those words echoed through my bones. Every sacrifice felt worth it, because what's money compared to the love of your child? But people didn't see that. To the outside world, I was the old man with the same jacket, the one who carried a lunch pail with sandwiches instead of buying takeout. Coworkers teased me about being tight-fisted. Neighbors saw me mowing my own lawn instead of hiring help and shook their heads. Even Jason sometimes would frown at my refusals, another loan, another bailout. They thought I was stingy, maybe even selfish. The truth was, I was saving. Not hoarding, not clinging, but saving for the things that mattered. I didn't waste money on show or ego. I kept it ready for when love needed it most. That chance came with Lily, my granddaughter. She was 10, bright-eyed, always scribbling in notebooks, talking about robots and coding like it was the language of the stars. One afternoon, she sat at my table, her little hands sketching designs that looked like alien blueprints. She sighed and said all the kids at school had laptops, that she wanted one for robotics club. Jason brushed it off. Maya rolled her eyes. Too expensive. She doesn't need it, they said. I stayed quiet, but my heart ached. I saw the spark in her eyes, the same spark Jason once had, and I couldn't let it dim. The next week, I went to the electronics store. The place smelled of plastic and new wires, the hum of machines filling the air. My hands trembled as I signed the receipt, not from weakness, but from pride. I imagined Lily's face when she opened the box. When I gave it to her, she froze her mouth open, eyes wide. For me, Grandpa? I nodded. For you. To build, to learn. She leapt into my arms, small arms tight around my neck. Her voice was muffled, but I heard every word. Grandpa, you're my real hero. In that moment, all the overtime shifts, all the canned soup dinners, all the jokes about me being cheap, they vanished. Because I knew what they never did. I wasn't saving for greed. I wasn't saving to hoard. I was saving for love. And I promised myself, I'll never waste a dime on greed, but I'll spend everything on love. That's me. He smiled, he sighed, he played the part. Even the chairs groaned with the weight of his show, a case title that made my life feel like a file folder. Jason stood to my left next to his attorney, a woman with neat hair and a watch bright enough to signal ships. He wore his best suit, navy blue tie squared. He set his jaw the way he does when he wants to look responsible. When I sat down, he squeezed my forearm as if to tether me in place, as if we were a team. Dad, this is only to keep you safe, he whispered loud enough that the judge could hear the word safe. I swallowed. The folder on my lap felt heavier than paper. Inside it were utilities paid by AutoPay, a printed calendar of my doctor visits, my grocery list in tidy columns, and a photograph of my wife. I pressed my thumb to the photo until the edge dented my skin, a small hurt to prove I was still here. The judge adjusted her glasses. Mr. Harris, good morning? She didn't smile, but she wasn't unkind. Miriam called her. She looked the way a meeting looks when it's already behind schedule. We'll proceed with testimony. Counsel Jason's attorney, Ms. Crowley, rose. Your Honor, petitioner calls Dr. Warren Simmons. My stomach sank. I knew the name before I saw the face. Dr. Simmons had been our family physician years back. He'd listened to Jason wheeze through childhood colds, signed my wife's discharge papers the week they told us the chemo wasn't helping anymore. We hadn't spoken since she died. Seeing him now felt like walking into your old house and finding all the furniture rearranged. He came in with a brown leather briefcase, the kind people carry when they want to be taken seriously. He didn't look at me, not at first. But I saw the flash of something crumpled and cream-colored slip deeper into the briefcase when he set it on the witness table, an envelope, and I watched his hand stay there a beat too long, guarding it like a secret. He raised his right hand for the oath, then sat. Ms. Crowley took 2 steps closer, the way a good angler brings the lure to where the fish already wants to bite. Doctor, could you summarize your qualifications? He did. In the tired cadence of someone who's rehearsed being impressive. Medical school residency, 30 years in family practice, certificates, lettered in gold and framed in heavy wood. The judge nodded. And have you had occasion to evaluate respondent, Mr. Harris? I have, he said, glancing toward Jason as if the words were seeking permission. Last week. Tell the court what you observed. He cleared his throat. Mr. Harris presented with subjective complaints of forgetfulness, misplacing items, difficulty recalling recent appointment. During my office visit, I performed a brief cognitive screen. In my opinion, he shows signs consistent with mild cognitive impairment, given the known risks facing seniors: financial exploitation, mismanagement of medication. I find guardianship appropriate for his safety. The words slid into the record like ice cubes into a glass, tidy cooling, meant to make the next swallow go down easier. I dug my nails into the folder. 15 minutes. That's what he'd given me last week. I'd sat in a room that smelled like ground coffee and paper forms while Jason did most of the talking. Dr. Simmons had asked me what day it was, who the president was, what 3 words I could repeat and remember later. He didn't ask about my AutoPay. He didn't ask anything that sounded like a life. Ms. Crowley paced just enough to keep the rhythm. "Doctor, what tools did you use for your evaluation?" "A brief screen," he said. Orientation questions recall a clock-drawing task. He didn't mention MOCI or MMSE by name. He didn't say formal anything. I wondered if he even owned a test kit or if he'd borrowed the questions from a waiting room magazine. "And in your medical opinion," Ms. Crowley pressed without a guardian, "is Mr. Harris at risk?" He nodded in the way people do when they're certain you'll agree. Years ago, those hands had patted Jason's shoulder after a vaccine. They'd once held my wife's chart with enough gentleness to make me think kindness was part of the prescription. Now they shuffled papers with a caution that felt like calculation. My throat tightened against a name I wanted to call him and wouldn't. "No further questions," Ms. Crowley said, and sat. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Harris, you may cross-examine the witness. Do you have questions for Dr. Simmons?" I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't even a man who liked arguing. I stood my knees stiffer than I remembered and walked to the small lectern. The wood was smooth in the spots other hands had worried over. I set my palms there and kept my voice low, the way I'd talk to a skittish horse. "Doctor, how long did you examine me?" He blinked. 15 minutes. "Did you administer a MOCA test?" His eyebrows knit, then smoothed. "No." "MMSE, no." I nodded slowly, as if the movement could buy me time. "In those 15 minutes, did you ask me how I pay my bills?" "No." "Did you ask whether I drive shop cook or maintain my home?" "No." "Did you obtain collateral records?" "Utilities bank statements?" "Any evidence of mismanagement?" "No," he said again. This time softer. A hush slid across the room like a blanket pulling up to the chin of an argument that didn't want to catch a cold. "Doctor," I said, "when you wrote subjective complaints of forgetfulness, whose subjectivity were you writing, mine or my son's?" Something flickered in his eyes, a pilot light relit by accident. "Family reported concerns," he said at last. "So to be clear, your opinion that I need a guardian is based on a 15-minute screen, no formal cognitive testing, no records about my bills or home and concerns reported by the person petitioning to be my guardian." For a moment, he looked like a man who'd backed his car just a little too far over the curb and was pretending not to notice the jolt. In my clinical judgment, the risk is sufficient. I wanted to ask about the envelope. I wanted to ask if kindness now cost more than he was willing to pay. But the judge's face told me the difference between what's true and what you can prove is a canyon you cross one careful stone at a time. Nothing further, I said, and the words tasted like a door closing. Ms. Crowley stood again, quick as a shadow. "Redirect, Your Honor. Doctor, is it uncommon for seniors to mask deficits in short encounters?" He brightened, relieved to be back on the road she paved. "Not uncommon." "And would family observations be clinically relevant?" "They can be," he said, almost grateful. "Thank you." When he stepped down, he finally looked at me just for a breath. There was regret there, or maybe memory, the kind that comes too late to be useful. He adjusted his briefcase handle and left the witness box with the careful gait of a man who knows exactly where the edge is and plans to stay 3 inches from it. The judge made a few notes. "Mr. Harris, please be seated." I sat. Across the aisle, a woman in a gray cardigan watched me with the soft, distant pity people reserve for strangers they've already decided not to help. I imagined the story she'd tell at dinner. "We saw a poor old man today. Thank God his son is stepping in. The kind of story that lets good people sleep well." Jason leaned in. "Dad," he murmured, "don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at his tie, straight and smug, and thought about the day I'd tied a much smaller tie around a much smaller neck, the day he'd stood on a chair so I could reach. My hero, he'd called me once. I wondered what word he'd use now. The bailiff called a short recess. I didn't stand. I stayed where I was, running my thumb over the edge of my wife's photograph until the paper warmed under the friction. In the thin gloss of her smile, I could almost hear her voice, "Stay sharp, protect yourself." When the recess ended, the room refilled. Ms. Crowley arranged her files in a neat fan, each tab a promise. The judge returned robe moving like a tide. The lights hummed. Somewhere a pen tapped 3 times, then twice, then 3 again, as if someone were signaling a ship through fog. "Counsel," the judge said, "call your next witness," and I tightened my grip on the folder. The proof of a life I still lived, knowing the worst wasn't over yet. Conflict, Part 2. Detailed script first-person narration. Ms. Crowley didn't waste momentum. Petitioner calls Maya Harris, she said, and my daughter-in-law stepped forward like an actress hitting her mark. Maya wore a charcoal dress and worry-like perfume. After the oath, she laced her fingers until the knuckles whitened. Mrs. Harris, Ms. Crowley began. What concerns you about your father-in-law's safety? I wish I didn't have to say this, Maya said, voice trembling, but last month he left the gas on. All night. I woke at 3 a.m. to the smell. If I hadn't checked, the house could have exploded. He didn't even remember turning the burner. A ripple moved through the gallery. People who'd never met me leaned in. There's no gas, I thought, not on our street. The HOA removed service in 2017. The utility mailed letters. My old range was capped and hauled away. The receipt and notice are filed under utilities. But none of that was in front of the judge. Only Maya's steady tremor and a vivid midnight disaster everyone could picture. Did you confront him? Ms. Crowley asked. I did, Maya said, glancing at me. He laughed. Then he asked what day it was. I didn't laugh. I hadn't asked the day, but a lie, if told gently, can pass for memory. The judge's pen scratched a note. Anything else? He forgets bills, mixes medications. We found notices on the door. There were no notices. AutoPay doesn't leave paper warnings. It leaves clean bank statements. But strangers know stories better than systems. No further questions, Ms. Crowley said. The judge looked at me. Mr. Harris. I rose but stayed at the table. Maya, do you recall when our neighborhood converted to full electric? She hesitated. 2017, I said. The gas company removed service. The HOA notified everyone. I have my copy. With respect, Ms. Crowley cut in. Respondent can introduce documents later. The judge nodded. Keep questions limited, sir. One more, I said. Those door notices, do you have a photo or a copy? Maya dabbed a dry eye. No, but we saw them. I sat. Jason went next. He didn't need the stand. He performed from counsel's table. Your Honor, my father doesn't realize how vulnerable he is. He took a call from someone pretending to be his bank, asked him to buy gift cards and read the numbers. He almost did. If I hadn't walked in... He opened his hands. Scammers target seniors every day. I'm just trying to protect him. It was almost true. I'd taken a call. I'd hung up. Jason hadn't walked in. He'd walked back out to tell it later. But courts don't rule on almosts. They weigh affidavits and testimony. And whose story sounds like the world? Ms. Crowley tied the bow. And you're not seeking control of assets for personal gain? Of course not, Jason said saintly. It's strange to recognize your child in a stranger. The judge steepled her fingers. We'll recess, then hear from respondent. During the break, I stayed seated. A woman in a gray cardigan passed and whispered, poor man. He looks lost. The word landed like a bruise. Not mistaken lost. I thought of the grocery store last week. The young cashier counted my change out loud. When I chuckled and said I had it, she smiled, the patient smile people save for someone else's grandfather. We just want to make sure, she said. Behind me, a man sighed like caring was an inconvenience. Recess ended. The judge returned. Respondent, you may present. I stood with my folder. Your Honor, my stove is electric. Our neighborhood removed gas in 2017. I have the HOA letter and the delivery receipt. My bills are AutoPay. I haven't missed one. My medications are organized in a weekly tray. My current physician has records. The scam call shows in my log. I hung up. The judge's pen paused. For a moment, she looked at me, not through me. Very well. Submit any documents. Counsel will review. Jason stiffened, then tilted toward his attorney. She answered with a micro nod. We spent another hour with dates and procedures. Finally, the judge removed her glasses. Here's the order, she said. The petition raises serious concerns. Respondent represents that documents may rebut several allegations. I'll continue the matter for 2 weeks to allow submissions and, if needed, a neutral evaluation. In the meantime, Mr. Harris remains restricted from major financial transactions, no transfer above $500, no changes to estate documents, and no sale or encumbrance of real property. Ordinary living expenses may continue. For larger purchases, seek leave of the court. $500 settled on my shoulders like a small man insisting he was light. You can buy groceries with that. You cannot buy dignity. Jason exhaled with theatrical relief. This is for your own good, Dad, he said softly for any ear nearby. I pressed the folder to my chest. Inside, my wife's photograph warmed under my palm. Stay sharp. As we filed out, our reflection slid across the courtroom door. The old man, Jason, the dutiful son, Maya, the worried witness, a perfect picture for other people's albums. It would take more than truth to develop the negative. In the hallway, a reporter I didn't know asked Jason for comment. He put on the face he keeps for cameras. I love my father. I'm doing the responsible thing. The microphone turned to me. Sir. I shook my head. Not because I lacked words, because I would choose where to spend them. Outside, the sunlight felt honest. I walked to my car and felt the familiar weight of the keys. 2 weeks, the judge had said. 2 weeks to turn stories into evidence, pity into doubt, and a son's performance into what it really is. I eased into traffic, the folder seatbelted beside me like a passenger I intended to protect. On the steps, I sat for a minute and looked at a brochure rack stuffed with legal aid pamphlets and glossy ads from firms with names that sounded like insurance policies. A sign on the wall read, "Filing fees payable by cash or card. Money again, always money." I did math the way I used to count bolts. 2 weeks, copies of records, maybe a neutral evaluation, maybe a lawyer if I had to. Every path had a meter running. I thought about the judge's question from the first hearing, whether I could afford counsel, and felt that old factory ache move from my back into my chest. I could fix a fence with a hammer and a day of patience. I couldn't hammer down legal bills. Across the lobby, a woman in scrubs argued into her phone about a nursing home placement. The words drifted over bed available, Medicaid pending family consent, and I felt a chill. I couldn't blame on the air conditioning. Safety is a word people use when they mean convenient. Safety is a door that only locks from the outside. Dusk met me on the porch like an old foreman. The pavement was damp, a sprinkler hissed. I unlocked the door, stepped into a hallway that knew my footsteps, and clicked on the kitchen light. The stove clock ticked. I set the court folder on the table. Paper is light until it knows something about you, then it's a brick. The courtroom still clung to me, the hum of lights, the disinfectant air, the way strangers watched as if they already knew how an old man's story ends. My son had handed them the script. I cracked mint leaves into a mug. Steam fogged my glasses. The first sip steadied me. The radio came on by habit, Yankees mid-inning, and went off again because the quiet felt more true. Across from me, the chair stayed empty as it had since cancer took my wife. She used to sit there with flour on her cheek. I traced the wood grain and let the ache come. Work first, feel later. I spread the folder's contents like tools on a bench. Utilities bank statements, the 2017 HOA letter. Full electric conversion gas removed signatures like anchors. The range receipt, my pill organizer, a phone log with the scam number circled and hung up in block ink. Evidence of a life that still fits in my hands. Next came money. I wrote in big letters, legal fees. Under it, evaluation, copies, certified mail, filing fees, attorney retainer. I did the math the way I used to count bolts twice. Then again, the judge's question, "Can you afford counsel?" replayed in my chest like winter air that won't warm. Safety, Jason kept saying as if the word fixed everything. Safety from scammers, from stove burners that don't exist, from bills that pay themselves. But the safety he offered looked like a locked door from the outside. I could smell the lemon clean of nursing homes, televisions murmuring to rooms that don't answer, folded blankets, rubber soles squeaking down polished halls. What is safety if it costs you the right to choose your own risks? I reached for the Bible on the hutch. Inside lay my wife's letter, thin from years but strong in hand, the same hand that steadied mine at the Super Bowl when we shouted from the cheap seats. "Stay sharp," she wrote. "Protect yourself. Love big, but don't let love make you easy to lead." I read it twice and traced her name. Her photograph sat on the counter, that grin that dared bad news. "I'm keeping my promise," I told her. "I'm just not sure which part comes first." Anger arrived late, heavy, not hot. Jason's voice echoed, "I love my father. I'm doing the responsible thing," as if taking my choices were a public service. I remembered teaching him to tie a necktie. The rabbit goes around the tree and into the hole, and felt an urge to retie his conscience. Poor man, he looks lost. The word bruised. I could map the grocery aisle where the cashier counted my change aloud, her patient smile for someone else's grandfather. I wasn't lost. I knew exactly where I was. That was the problem. I opened a fresh notebook. If a life can be reduced to exhibits, let mine be labeled properly. Binder plan. Bills utilities. HOA letter, 2017 range receipt. AutoPay confirmations, medical physician list medication schedule, pharmacy printouts, home photos of electric stove meter breaker panel, calls. Phone log with the scam number, note hung up immediately. Witnesses grocery cashier, neighbor who watched the gas line capped. HOA manager. I wrote each tab on a yellow post-it, stuck them to a new 3-ring binder, and slid documents into clear sleeves the way a careful man stores seeds for winter. Next, an independent evaluation, not a 15-minute chat, but a full workup, MOCA MMSE. I found Dr. Hawthorne, a neurologist downtown, and dialed. When the scheduler answered, I asked for the earliest comprehensive appointment. Thursday at 9. Bring your meds, bring your glasses, sleep well the night before. Done, I said, and wrote it in sharp letters. Then I drafted an email to Alicia Parker, elder law attorney. Subject: consultation request, guardianship petition. Facts only. Case number, hearing date, allegations, documents ready. I didn't ask for pity. I asked for process. Before I sent it, I slipped my wife's photo into my shirt pocket. Courage is often just a familiar weight against your heart. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. Jason. He said not to stress, to let him help, maybe not to drive, that he loved me. We, the coalition, he said out loud. The plan, he didn't. I saved the message. I dialed Lily next. She answered on the second ring, voice bright like a porch light. Grandpa. I got my bot to follow a line with a light sensor. Tell me the part you're proudest of, I said. The error correction, she replied. It kept drifting left and I caught it earlier this time. Good, I said. Catching drift, that's most of life. She was quiet a second. Are you okay? I will be, I said. You keep building. When we hung up, the house felt smaller and larger at once. I tested myself. I wrote 3 words, Mint Ticket Radio, then set a timer for 10 minutes. I recited the months backward, counted by 7s, pictured a clock and drew it quick and round. At 5 minutes, I washed the mug. At 8, I took the trash to the back door. At 10, I reopened the notebook. Mint, ticket, radio. I smiled. It felt like tightening a bolt that had rattled loose on a long drive. Safety isn't a leash. On the factory floor, safety meant knowing where your fingers were before you touched the blade and keeping them clear by choice. People sell safety like an appliance, plug it in and it hums. Mine is a craft learned in noise and heat, made of attention and choice. A soft wind shouldered the porch. The brass chime my wife found at a yard sale tinkled. Tomorrow, I'd weed the roses. She used to say they liked conversation. I finished the email to Alicia Parker, attached the document list, the neurology appointment, and the judge's order, and pressed send. I printed a copy and slid it into the binder under legal. Then I added a new post-it timeline. Day 1. Court order. Binder started. Dr. Hawthorne scheduled. Email to Parker sent. Day 2 to 3. Gather HOA documents. Range receipt meter photo. Pharmacy printout. Call HOA manager. Day 4. Ask the grocery cashier for a statement. Note her manager's name. Day 5. Draft my declaration, facts only. Day 6. Neurology appointment, bring meds, glasses, sleep well. Day 7 to 10. Parker review, submit exhibits, practice testimony. I stuck the timeline to the refrigerator. The magnet clicked. I felt more architect than defendant. Another voicemail from Jason. Lawyers are expensive. Let him handle my accounts. Take the stress off. Love you. Love. A word that can mean mercy or leash. I saved that one too. It was late. The tea had cooled. The house sounded like houses do, at midnight, pipes, shifting wood, remembering sun, the refrigerator making small purposeful noises. I took the Super Bowl ticket from my wallet and set it beside the letter. I'm not lost, I told the room. I know exactly where I am, and I know the way out. I slid my wife's photo back into my pocket and buttoned the flap. I put the binder in my canvas tote from the hardware store, faintly scented of rope and cedar. I laid out tomorrow's clothes like a man packing for weather he refuses to fear. Before I turned off the kitchen light, I recorded a new voicemail greeting. You've reached Robert Harris. If this is about my case, leave your full contact information. I return calls once each afternoon. I turned the radio back on, but low just enough to hear the announcer's even keel. Some rules still hold 3 strikes, 4 balls fair and foul chalked where the human eye can see them. Upstairs, I paused at the bedroom door, hand on the frame where paint has been rubbed smooth by better days. The bed looked too big, the pillows too white. I set the tote on the chair, the binder tucked like a sleeping thing inside. I stood in the dim and spoke to the quiet. I will defend my freedom calmly, thoroughly, and with proof. Downstairs, the clock ticked faithful as a friend. I left the radio whispering and the porch chime free to sing if the wind asked. The house felt less like a target and more like a promise. In the morning there would be phone calls and copies and a garden to weed. Tonight there would be sleep, the kind you earn when you decide who you are and what you'll do next. I clicked the lamp off. The room exhaled, and in the dark with my wife's photo warm against my heart, something simple and solid settled into place. Resolve. Thursday came dressed like a hospital, white halls, quiet shoes, air that smelled like alcohol swabs and lemon cleaner. Dr. Hawthorne's neurology clinic lived on the 4th floor behind a glass door where a receptionist smiled without showing teeth. I signed in, wrote the date, and noticed my handwriting steady, the loops the same shape they've been since the factory locker room had a bulletin board. A nurse called my name. Her sneakers squeaked softly. "We'll do a full cognitive workup today, Mr. Harris. Takes about 45 minutes. Bring your glasses." I brought my glasses, my patience, and a lucky penny, I said. Humor as armor. She laughed. "Good. I'll take the first two." They sat me in a small room that could have been any room, beige walls. A print of a sailboat, the faint hum of air conditioning counting out seconds. Dr. Hawthorne came in with a notebook in a posture made of kindness. Not the syrupy kind, but the kind that leaves space for dignity to sit down. "We'll do a MOCA and parts of an MMSE, she said. "Standard stuff. This isn't a courtroom. There are no tricks. Ready?" I nodded. She began. "Tell me the date, the day of the week, the city we're in," I told her. No hesitation. She read 5 words, spaced them out like fence posts. River, velvet, church, daisy red. "I'll ask you for them later," she said. We drew a clock together, 11:10 hands set just so. I pictured the wall clock over my grill and sketched the circle fast, then slower to shade my certainty into the numbers. We named animals from pictures. I tapped when she said a certain letter, then didn't when she said other letters. I printed sentences. I folded paper. She asked me to subtract 7 from 100, then 7, again and again. I remembered factories counting parts, counting breaths, how numbers could calm a man when noise tried to take him. She asked me to repeat a sentence that tasted like a tongue twister, then one that required remembering the turn in the middle. I said them back. She smiled with her eyes. 10 minutes in, she asked for the 5 words. River, velvet, church. Daisy, red, now backwards. Red, daisy, church, velvet, river. We kept going. She asked how I managed my medications, weekly tray labeled mornings and nights. "Bring it next time," she said. "I like the ones with big compartments, fewer excuses to make mistakes." She asked who paid my bills. "I do. AutoPay where I can check when I have to. I reconcile my bank once a month. How do you shop? I make lists. The cashier thinks I can't count, but I let her feel helpful and double-check at home." She chuckled, then turned serious. "And scams, I hang up. I write the number in a log. I have a folder of them now. Scammers and saints, sometimes the distinction is in the closing pitch." When we finished, she set the clipboard down. "No hurry. You did well," she said. "More than well. I see no evidence of dementia or impairment. Your attention is good, your recall is intact, your executive function planning organizing better than many people 20 years younger. I'm going to write a report today. It will say you have capacity to manage your daily living and your finances. I'll write a letter for the court, too." I felt something unclench between my ribs. Not triumph, permission to breathe. "Thank you, doctor. Bring me your pill organizer and a copy of your AutoPay list," she added. "Judges like paper. So do I." "So do I." I said. "Paper minds its manners." She shook my hand. Her grip was dry and concise. "Good luck, Mr. Harris. Don't let anyone borrow your dignity and return it scuffed." I left with a printout of appointment notes and a promise that the full report would arrive by end of day. The elevator ride down smelled like hand sanitizer and relief. Alicia Parker's office lived in a brick building that used to be something else, maybe a bank, judging by the vault-like calm of the lobby. Inside, her receptionist offered coffee. I asked for water and a copy machine. The copier purred as it swallowed my HOA letter from 2017, the range receipt, the phone log with "hung up" circled. I stacked the copies in neat piles and slid each into my binder sleeves. with a satisfaction that felt like laying bricks plumb and true. Alicia came out in flats and purpose. "Mr. Harris," she said, "come in. Bring your binder. We're going to be friends." Her office smelled like new paper and hot plastic from a shredder cooling down. A wall of binders blinked their colored tabs like buoys marking a safe channel. She motioned to the table, and I set my binder there, flipped to the tabs I'd labeled in post-it yellow bills: medical, home, calls, witnesses, legal. She walked through each with a pen, tapping a quiet metronome on the pages. AutoPay statements, good. HOA, full electric letter, excellent. Range receipt photo of the electric stove to match, please. Pill organizer, bring it for a shot with today's date. Phone log clean. We'll request your cell records too. I gave her Dr. Hawthorne's appointment summary and the promise of a formal report. Alicia's eyebrows lifted a half-inch. "This is gold. We'll file it with a declaration from you laying out facts in plain language. No adjectives, just dates, bills, and what you do." "What about the doctor Jason brought?" I asked. "We won't insult him. We'll bury his opinion under better paper." She smiled. "And I'll file a motion to modify the temporary restriction at least to raise your limit for routine expenses. We'll attach the neuro report, the bills, photos of your home, and request a neutral evaluation only if the judge insists. But frankly, Hawthorne is plenty." She leaned back. "Here's how we tell your story. Facts first, feeling after. The judge needs to see the life you live, not just the life they say you live. Bring the pill box, bring the utility bills, bring the HOA letter. We'll let the paper speak." The door clicked. Evan stood there, head set around his neck hair like it had argued with a hoodie. He held up a small USB drive between two fingers as if pinching a fly. Mr. Harris, you said you needed anything weird around your house the last few months?" I blinked. "Evan?" He glanced at Alicia, then back at me. My Ring camera points toward your front walk. Not to spy, just to catch package thieves. It records motion. I pulled last month's files. There's a clip timestamped of Maya going into your place at noon on a weekday with a tote. She comes out with a trash bag. 2 hours later, she comes back with the tote and leaves without it. I thought, that seemed not normal. Alicia was already moving a legal hawk citing a mouse. "Come in," she said. "Can you email the original file and bring your device for a quick scan? We'll need metadata, date, time, GPS if available. And I'll draft a declaration for you to sign, just what you saw and how your camera works." Evan nodded suddenly, confident, on a battlefield made of chords and code. "Yeah, I can export with hashes." My train of thought goes, if anyone says there was a gas incident at night, but I have video of someone setting up the scene in daylight that's like sussy. He winced at his own slang, then powered through. "Guess all those hours gaming finally leveled me up. Not all heroes wear capes, some respawn with receipts." Alicia grinned. "Today, receipts are capes." I looked at Evan and saw past the noise and the revving. Car saw a neighbor who had noticed the right thing, saved the right file, and come at the right time. "Thank you," I said. "I misjudged you." He shrugged. "Happens. People misjudge me for sport." He pointed at my binder. "But, that's cracked like in a good way. Tabs and all." Alicia took the USB with the tenderness you reserve for delicate evidence. "We'll log possession now. Mr. Harris signed here that Evan provided it today." "We did." She turned to Evan. "I'll write a declaration. We'll review it together. Keep your original files backed up. Don't share on social." He saluted with the headset. I, when he left, Alicia tapped the table. "We now have a neurologist's report of capacity, documentary proof contradicting the gas story, video evidence suggesting staging, and your lived routine. Next step, witnesses. We made calls. The HOA manager forwarded the 2017 conversion notice and offered to sign a statement. Our subdivision has been full electric since that year, no functioning gas lines. Pharmacy printed my refill history and wrote a note. Patient uses weekly organizer correctly, no confusion noted. The grocery cashier agreed to a short statement. Customer counts and pays independently, speaks clearly, engages appropriately. Alicia assembled everything like a watchmaker returns gears to a patient clock. I'll file a motion to modify restrictions tomorrow morning and provide copies to opposing counsel. I'll also notice our witness list. If they push back, fine. We'll meet them with paper." She paused. "One more thing, Mr. Harris. Do you have any estate planning wills, powers of attorney, trusts? I did. After my wife died, a lawyer at church helped me set up a revocable living trust. I kept it in a separate binder in the hall closet behind a box of Christmas lights. I brought it in a little dusty but solid in the hand. Alicia opened it like a hymn book and hummed approval. Good drafting. House is titled to the trust, successor trustee named, and she tapped a paragraph, a no contest clause. If a beneficiary challenges, they forfeit. I felt a small private click deep inside, like the moment a key finds the right tooth. It's for Lily, I said quietly. She's the beneficiary. Alicia translated for the part of me that still thought in wrenches and rails. Picture a locked box, she said. Your house lives inside it. If anyone tries to pry it open by fighting the plan, they lose everything inside for themselves. Even if a guardianship were granted, the trust is still the trust. Your son can't reach through it to grab the deed. And if he pushes his luck, the box bites. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been rationing. Jason had been circling my roof like a hawk, thinking the coop was open. He didn't know there were bars he couldn't see, bars I'd put up years ago because a good man plans for the storms he hopes won't come. Does he know? I asked. He will, Alicia said. But not from you, from the filings. Her phone buzzed. Speak of the devil, she murmured, opposing counsel, asking for an extension. She typed something measured and merciless. We'll accommodate 48 hours. While they're busy, we'll file our motion with Hawthorne's report and Evan's video declaration. On my way out, my phone vibrated. Jason. I let it ring twice, then answered. Dad, he said sweet as sunscreen. Let's not make this a war. Lawyers are expensive. I can step in, help manage things. We keep this in the family, and you won't have to deal with all the stress. We'll stick to the facts, I said. A beat. Colder now. You're being manipulated. The last time I was manipulated, I said it was by a salesman who convinced me a cheaper drill could do a harder job. I've learned. He huffed. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking on paper, I said, and hung up politely. That night I took the long way home past the ballpark lights. The field glowed like possibility. In the kitchen, mint tea rose like a flag. I set the binder on the table and tucked my wife's photo into my shirt pocket. The chime on the porch clinked once wind crossing a key. I opened the binder to timeline and added new lines. Day 8, Hawthorne report received, filed with court. Day 9. Motion to modify restrictions filed. Exhibits attached. HOA letter range receipt photos. Pharmacy statement cell records request. Day 10. Evans declaration notarized. Video metadata logged. Day 11. HOA manager declaration signed. Day 12, cashier statement collected. Day 13, prep testimony with Alicia. Day 14, hearing. Underneath, I wrote what Alicia had said in my own words. Facts first. Feeling after. Let the paper speak. I practiced answers out loud the way I used to practice safety drills on the factory floor. Yes, Your Honor. Electric since 2017. Bills on AutoPay. I hung up on the scammer. Here's my pill organizer. Here's my neurologist's report. I slowed down between sentences until calm became metronome. Before bed, I walked the yard. The roses needed deadheading, an old-fashioned word for making room for what's next. I carefully laid the spent blooms on the compost and told my wife about the day. Hawthorne's calm. Alicia's teeth. Evan's headset and unexpected heroics. Back inside, I placed the trust binder beside the legal one. 2 boxes on the table, 2 kinds of protection. I ran my hand over the covers and felt steadier than paper should allow. I turned the radio to the Yankees at low volume and sat with the sound of a game that obeys rules, older than my troubles. 3 strikes, 4 balls, chalk lines, straight as promises. In 2 weeks, we'd walk back into fluorescent light. But we would not be the same people who sat there last time. They would not be the only ones with the script. I slipped my wife's photo deeper into my pocket until warmth pressed through cloth to skin. I'm ready, I told the house, the roses, the ghost of factory steam in my lungs. I'm ready to speak in the language the court understands. And somewhere between the last sip of tea and the final out-resolve, change shape from a feeling to a plan with tabs and dates and names. A thing you can carry, a thing that can carry you. Courtrooms have their own weather. Today, the air ran cool from the vents, dry enough to curl paper. The room smelled like fresh toner and floor polish. I sat at counsel table with my binder squared to the edge, my wife's photo warm in my shirt pocket. Alicia leaned in and tapped the cover twice, our quiet ritual. Facts first. Let the papers speak. The bailiff called the case. Honorable Miriam Calder adjusted her glasses. We're here on the continued guardianship petition in Ree Harris. She glanced at Jason, then at me, then down at the docket as if weighing three versions of the same story. Alicia stood. Respondent is ready, Your Honor. We began with the cleanest blade. Alicia offered Dr. Hawthorne's report capacity intact, attention, memory, and executive function within normal range, no indication of cognitive disorder. She placed the original on the clerk's tray and a copy on the judge's bench. The pages made a crisp, sound courtroom music I could tap my foot to. Exhibit A, Alicia said. Then she laid down the map of my life in paper. Exhibit B, the HOA letter, 2017, confirming our subdivision is full electric. Exhibit C, the range receipt and photos of my electric stove and service panel, today's date on a sticky note in the frame. Exhibit D, AutoPay, confirmations for utilities neatly highlighted. Exhibit E, a photo of my pill organizer, dated compartments filled correctly. Exhibit F, phone log with the scam number circled and the words hung up in block ink. Exhibit G, Alicia said, last voice steady. Evan walked forward, hair-combed, headset left at home, holding a USB and a small evidence envelope. Declaration of Evan Carter notarized with video clip from a ring camera positioned on respondent's front walk. Metadata attached. It shows Ms. Maya Harris entering respondent's home at noon with a tote, exiting with a trash bag, returning with the tote later that afternoon. Date stamped the same week as the alleged gas incident. The judge looked up. For the first time today, her face changed. Counsel, have you provided a copy to petitioner? We have, Your Honor. Alicia slid a duplicate to Ms. Crowley, who took it like it might stain. Play the clip, the judge said. The screen on the evidence card flickered. There was my front path in honest daylight, Maya in sunglasses, tote on shoulder, in, out with a bag, back again. If a story had been staged, this looked like rehearsal. The clip ended. The room made the kind of sound people make when they realize they've been nodding at the wrong person. Alicia sat. Respondent rests on the exhibits. The judge turned to Dr. Sir Simmons, who'd been called earlier by petitioner and now looks smaller in his chair. Doctor approach. He did cautious. In your prior testimony, you stated you performed a brief cognitive screen lasting 15 minutes. Did you administer a MOCA and MMSE? No, Your Honor. Did you review bank records or utility statements? No. Did you examine the home? No. Were your impressions based in part on statements made by Mr. Harris's son, the petitioner? He cleared his throat. Yes. The judge's pen paused in midair. For a long second, the only sound was the vent humming like a wary bee. No further questions, she said. Ms. Crowley tried to salvage, but paper doesn't bruise easily. When she finished, the judge stacked the exhibits in two neat columns. Accusation and answer, and looked straight at Jason. Here's the court's ruling, she said. The petition alleges cognitive decline and dangerous behavior. Respondent has provided a comprehensive neurological evaluation showing capacity. Documentary evidence contradicts the gas allegation with specificity. HOA conversion to full electric appliance receipts and photographs. Billing records reflect consistent management. Additional witness statements support independent functioning. The court finds petitioner has not met his burden. She set her pen down. The petition for guardianship is denied. The temporary financial restrictions are lifted in full. A sound left me. I didn't know I was keeping something between breath and prayer. Alicia's hand found my shoulder and squeezed once, like you do when a heavy machine finally stops rattling. Jason leaned toward the microphone. Your Honor, I only wanted safety. This is being twisted. The gallery rustled, some sympathetic, some not. The judge held up a palm. Court has ruled. Alicia rose again, her voice now a different instrument. One further matter, Your Honor. Respondent moves for sanctions and a protective order based on misrepresentation and fraud upon the court. We request attorney's fees. Additionally, we ask that the court issue an order to show cause why petitioner and Ms. Maya Harris should not be referred for investigation by the district attorney, potential perjury and forgery regarding the alleged consent form and the manufactured gas narrative. Silence arrived like a dropped curtain. Even the vent seemed to reconsider. The judge tapped her pen twice, then wrote quickly. The motion for protective order is granted. Respondents' exhibits establish a prima facie showing of misrepresentation. The court issues an order to show cause. A sanctions hearing is set for 30 days hence. In addition, given the nature of the allegations and the evidence presented, the court will refer the matter to the district attorney's office for review. The gavel sounded soft final, a lid settling on a box that didn't need opening again. When we stepped into the hallway, the courthouse smelled like vending machine coffee and toner. The world felt louder here, heels on tile, a phone ringing somewhere, someone laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. "Dad," Jason called. "Wait." Alicia's brow ticked. I shook my head. "It's okay," I said, and stepped aside with him near a window where the light made us honest. He spoke in a lower register, the one he saves for selling. "Don't ruin my life over this. We're family. You can stop this. I'll back off. You drop the rest. It doesn't have to go to the DA." I looked at him, the jaw I'd taught to shave the brow I'd once kissed after he'd fallen off a bike, and felt two timelines lay over each other like transparencies, the boy with a crooked tie asking for help, and the man who forged a signature and called it love. "Family," I said, "is respect in practice." His eyes flashed, then softened. "I was trying to protect you." "Protection without permission has another name," I said. "You know it." He swallowed 100 arguments and chose silence. Maya watched from a bench, sunglasses back on, as if a darker room could be worn. Alicia joined me, voice low. "We'll file the written order this afternoon. I'll notify you when the DA assigns an intake." I nodded. "Thank you." We walked toward the exit. The glass doors showed us back to ourselves, an old man with a binder, a lawyer with a spine of steel. A sun farther away than the hallway made it seem. I pressed my fingers to my shirt pocket. The edge of the photograph answered like a pulse. On the steps, the sky was a harder blue than when we'd gone in. The brass chime of someone's keychain rang as a breeze found us. I took the Super Bowl ticket from my wallet, and the letter from my Bible wasn't necessary. The words were already carved into my ribs. I still love my son, I told the air and her and myself. But love without respect is no love at all. I looked back at the courthouse doors where choices wore suits and outcomes had file numbers. Justice isn't mercy, and mercy isn't justice. Some days, a father has to choose which lesson the world will teach and which one love cannot. I turned to the camera that wasn't there and to the people who had been with me anyway. Jason's phone lit up with an unknown number. He turned away, shoulder to the wall. "No names," he whispered. "Text the terms, or call me tonight." I couldn't tell if it was a lawyer, a creditor, or something worse. Would you forgive a son who cracks or let the system teach him? Comment which side you're on. Like and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Thank you for watching.